Ta-da! The wait is over, and here with all of you, the wonderful Mallory Erickson. Welcome, Mallory.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be talking today.
Well, for those who are new today, we do this little interview series that we call DPP Office Hours. Every week or so, we bring people that are super interesting. We hope, and we have a chat. You're very welcome to add questions in the comments as we go, and we'll try to address them. This isn't like I've been told, Lewis, this wasn't structured enough. We were expecting, you know, more content here. That's not necessarily the goal, although we try to share as much value as possible, but it is more to have an informal conversation with somebody who's thinking really differently and brightly about fundraising nowadays. So Mallory, we've had, like, you had me on your podcast. We've had like so many back and forths about different topics. I'd love to understand first how you work with nonprofits, in what capacities, what types of roles, what types of nonprofits you most typically work with.
Yeah. So the primary way that I work with organizations is through my course or program, which is called the Power Partners Formula. So it's a 12-month program. It doesn't take that long to go through. There's a self-guided course inside, and then there's monthly group coaching calls and guest coaching calls. And I would say actually the folks who are inside are a pretty big range. I mean, we have EDs that are sort of single shops. We have major gift officers at huge institutions. So anyone really who touches fundraising in any capacity has a place inside the community, because what Power Partners is really about is the infusion of fundraising strategy, executive coaching skills, and habit and behavior design. So we talk a lot. I often say that Power Partners was like the first ever alignment first methodology. And we talk about personal alignment, habit alignment. Like, are we doing the things that we say that are going to lead to the things we say we want? Is there alignment between our behaviors and what our goals? And then alignment with our funders. Like, we're not just trying to get money from everyone. We don't believe that all money is created equal. We're trying to find the right funders and align around our shared goals and missions. And so there are a number of different ways to plug into that. Sometimes folks join Power Partners when they want to use the formula to set up their fundraising shop from the very beginning. And sometimes folks come in because they've been banging their head against the wall for a long time around a certain issue. And they're like, I need a different framework to think about this. And so they come in to sort of get that infusion of the behavior and habit design, the executive coaching around the fundraising strategy piece. So there are a lot of different ways to plug in.
Wonderful. I loved alignment. And I was thinking, no wonder you need 12 months at least, because boy, that's a huge, like, I so often see this as something that can unlock huge opportunity, but it's, it's like that one thing that's not rocket science, but it's yet so difficult, right?
Yeah, but I also find it's like when something about our fundraising isn't working, like when we feel that resistance, something about it isn't working, it's because one of those things isn't aligned. Either like we are not personally aligned with the work that we're doing or how we're showing up, our behaviors are not aligned with our goals, or we're not aligned with the right fundraisers. And so we can like feel that in our work. And so after years of trying to explore and hating fundraising myself, and feeling like I couldn't figure out how to make this work for me, this was really the core of what changed things, was this understanding and then building skills and tools in these areas. And then to just finish your question, the other way that I work with folks is primarily through VIP days. And often it's because they want an element of Power Partners, but they want some one-on-one support digging into it. So whether that's creating copy that's deeply aligned with the right funders for them, or a prospect list that's really rooted in alignment, or they want to figure out what assets they should be leveraging for sponsorship levels, those types of things, I'll dig in one-on-one. And then I take very few like full on executive coaching clients a year, just for capacity issues, where folks are with me from 6 to 12 months, really doing sort of deep executive coaching work. So that's sort of my whole gambit.
Okay, so, and is that kind of when people visit your website, which I invite everybody to do, MalloryErickson.com, and it says "Stop hounding your donors." And I said, "Oh, I love that. We'll turn that into." Is that what you mean by alignment with funders?
Yes.
That we're just going after people we're not aligned with.
Yes. Well, I think there's a few different reasons that we end up hounding donors. I think one of the reasons we end up hounding donors is because we do this sort of scattered spray fire system of fundraising, and we
Mm-hmm.
try to be everything for everyone, and we don't know sort of who to prioritize. And I don't mean who to prioritize based on like net worth. I mean who to prioritize because who's actually aligned with the work that we're doing.
Who
And I
actually
think we
cares, no?
yeah, who actually cares. And I think we've just been taught so many kind of broken strategies in this sector, like when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about, you know, board introductions and warm connections. The amount of years I spent trying to get my board members to be making introductions to people in their network who had high capacity, and then I
Uh-huh.
would maybe get an introduction, maybe the person would respond to the email from their friend, and then I would never hear from them again. It was like I was
Mm-hmm.
not thinking about whether or not that person was deeply aligned with our work. And I'm not saying warm connections can't be helpful, but starting there, like starting with the money and trying to build everything around it, is actually so much harder than starting with alignment and figuring out how you cultivate and build relationships from there. And so I think when we're hounding, it's because we just have this like money at all costs mentality. And whether we're hounding people because of the clickbait we're putting in our emails, or we're hounding people because we're just not listening to them when they're not interested in being more deeply involved with us, those are the things that make us hounding. It doesn't mean people inside my program don't send a few emails before they give up on someone, but the language is fundamentally different. And actually, the
Mm-hmm.
last email says, I don't want to, like, please let me know if you're not interested in connecting. Like, I don't want to be hounding you, but I also don't want to leave you out of this opportunity. And I sense that we were aligned because of X, Y, and Z, but please tell me if I've missed the mark here and you don't want to hear from me again. And then you let them go. And I just think you know, there's so many emotional reasons why it's hard to let donors go. And so in the alternative is that we end up hounding them and it doesn't feel good to anyone.
Yeah, and there's like so much guilt, right? I don't know, like bred into the training that we get into in the profession. And I joke a lot about, all this advice about you have to call every single one of your donors to thank them the morning after they make their gift, before you walk your dog, or else you're a bad person. But sometimes letting go is the right thing to do for everybody. I love that
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
I love that. You said, you talk about alignment. Is engagement another word, or is that kind of in that similar sphere of, is it similar concept?
Yeah, well, so I think about engagement as like the sort of mechanism of fulfilling an aligned relationship. So I think like
Mm-hmm.
the alignment is sort of the foundation of like, should we be doing any of this
Yeah.
together? And then engagement, once you know that there is alignment, then engagement also can feel so much more authentic and real and human, because you're not just trying to engage anyone, you're trying to engage people sort of rooted in the right things. And it really, I think, engagement for engagement's sake can sometimes be
Mm-hmm.
hard to create content around, but
Well,
engagement,
and feels kind
oh,
of gross, no? I mean, look at
totally,
Facebook,
yes.
etc.
Exactly. I mean, and so it's like, I think sometimes we hear the words, like when we hear engagement or we hear cultivation or we hear stewardship, and we think we're doing the words for the sake of the words or just for the sake
You're
of
so right.
money. Right. We're like, oh, like this doesn't feel good. But if we're like rooted in alignment, we're like, we want the same thing in our community. And we are going to contribute to that achievement in different ways. I'm going to do it by running this program and doing this thing. You're going to do it by investing in this, but we are
Mhm.
ultimately driving towards the same goal. Then every single one of those other activities feels fundamentally different.
That's beautiful. And also the concept of purpose, comes to mind. Alignment around purpose. You recently had a podcast episode with something somebody a few people might know here, Seth Godin, the kind of marketing super guru. Um, what did he have? Did he share, thoughts in this line as well? I remember him as being very outspoken.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because so Purple Cow was the first marketing book I ever read as a fundraiser, but I was in a position in an organization where I was actually also marketing like an exchange program. And so I was like, all
Uh-huh.
right, I got to learn something about marketing. And
Yeah.
so I picked up Purple Cow somehow. And it
Hmm.
really hooked me on Seth's work around how you build community, right? So he's written tribes, he's done all these different, really what
Yeah.
he talks about is how do you build community? And really, as he coined the term permission marketing, right? Which is essentially earning your attention, like earning the attention
Hmm.
from the people that you're in front of. Everything I read, I was like, oh, this is fundraising. This
He's a
is
it,
everything,
totally.
right? It's
Yeah.
like everything is rooted in what good fundraising is about. And so Seth talks about in the podcast interview, one of the things he talks about this in a lot of different ways. One of the things that I really appreciate that he talks about is he's like, listen, if you want to fundraise in a way where you are doing that sort of spray fire, clickbait urgency, like I'm going to make everyone scared enough to maybe give me $10 or to give me enough money to walk away, right?
Hmm.
You can do that. And you need to recognize that what you're doing is you're coming in for a quick win, right?
Hmm.
You're trying to get some short-term wins, and you're not prioritizing the long-term relationships with your donors. Because gosh, the amount of years I fundraised and did things like this, and no one sort of said this to me, or I didn't realize this, that like when you send out that email, the person
Hmm.
who gives does not feel good when they're giving, right? They're giving because they feel guilt, or they're giving because they feel hounded. Like, and so
Hmm.
that moment, that experience for the donor is likely not something they want to repeat. And so and for us as the fundraiser, we're
Amazing.
like, wow, I just threw all the spaghetti at the wall on that one. Now what do I say? Like, I just told them if they gave $25 by midnight, I was going to fix blank, but I still need more money. So now what do I say next? And we just get
Hmm.
more and more outrageous sometimes, instead of
Hmm.
being really honest and really authentic and saying the true thing and trusting our donors to come along for the journey and slowing down and building in nuance and providing value. And so in the interview, he talks about all of those things in ways that I think are really important. And I would recommend, I mean, he has so much work out there, but I would recommend every fundraiser in particular reads the book This Is Marketing, because I really believe that like you could cross off that title and call it This Is Cultivation, and pretty much swap out those words, or
Hmm.
stewardship, frankly, throughout the book, and just get so much rich advice on what does it mean to nurture a group of people to help them feel included, a sense of belonging and identity and community. And that's really, he talks about that a lot on the episode.
Wonderful. I'm typing in the name of your podcast for everybody to go right now and subscribe on Apple Podcast or wherever else they listen. Because I mean, you have like pretty constant interviews, and they're all amazing. Um,
Seth Godin.
so,
Someone just
yeah,
asked who's the author of that resource. Seth Godin. This Is Marketing. It's one of his more recent books. I highly recommend it.
yeah. Thank you, August. It's great to see you here. So there's so many topics that we align on, and it's funny because we come at things from very different places and lived experiences. But it's encouraging that we kind of meet somewhere. You mentioned something that when people ask me, like, what are the benefits of building a community, which I find
Mm,
is kind of that relationship building machine, right? It's where you go if you want to scale that. And I sometimes I just say, well, it feels great, and you said like the
mm.
opposite, like the other way kind of just doesn't feel so good, and donors don't end up feeling so good. um I love your take on something that I've seen kind of going around on social media, which is the concept of friction. Maybe
Mm.
you posted about it a little bit. And it's this idea that friction can be a good thing, and you mentioned relationships, right?
Hmm.
Like there's good friction and there's bad friction, I guess. What are your views on this? I'm sure you have a really important interesting viewpoint.
Oh, it's so interesting. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. So My 2 cents is that friction is an important um friction can be an important element when you're deciding if something is for you, right? I think like if you're like when I read recently a post that said something like I think there should be maybe more friction in fundraising than we're hearing talked about. And on the
Yeah.
tech side, we're hearing a lot about frictionless experiences for donors.
Well, like Venmo, right? That's kind of
Yes.
what the selling point was with Venmo, and I never kind of bought into it, but I'm still waiting to try to understand that.
So to me, at the point of a transaction, which is essentially Venmo, it should be frictionless. Like nobody should get to the moment where they're trying to move money and they have to go through a million steps. They've already made a decision. And I think at that point, post decision, you want to make things as frictionless as possible. Where I think friction is really important is in kind of the nonprofit storytelling arc. So if we look at the pillars of nonprofit of storytelling and storytelling that releases the hormones in our brains that produce ultimately positive feelings that we know is linked to increased giving, what happens in that arc is that there is a rising action or sort of rising conflict, right? When you're sort of telling that story, you're talking about the challenges, you're talking about ways you've tried to solve them in the past, you're talking about what the next challenges were when you try after you tried X, Y, and Z. During
Mhm.
that piece, there's friction,
Mhm.
and that's okay, right? Same thing, I think, if you're in a one-on-one engagement with a potential major donor who's pushing back around your model. I don't think we sit there and say, oh, yeah, no, you're right. We probably should do it exactly that way. Like, please give me restricted funding for this thing that you want that I don't think is a good idea, but I just want to get the money. So no friction, right? Like, okay, like, no, like we want friction then,
Yeah,
okay?
we should lean
Friction
into
then.
that, no? Exactly.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, like, friction, it's just about but like again, if there's alignment, I think there's a lot less friction because you've established alignment from the beginning, right? So if you establish
Mhm.
alignment from the beginning with a donor from a donor base, there ends up being a lot less friction, although there's still going to be moments where they're like feeling, oh gosh, like I hate hearing that, or that's really
Yeah,
hard to know that thing didn't
well, that's a
work,
good
or
thing. Yeah.
that's a good thing, right? It's just
Mhm.
then I think once a decision is made about giving, frictionless technology is important, especially because we use it in all the other elements of our life. And so when I think giving becomes more complicated than it is to give money to your friend or to pay for a service or to do these other things, then I think sort of our digital experience can impact the trust potentially that we have with an organization or how comfortable we feel. We start to doubt, like, I'm on page 4 of this form. How long is it going to take? It doesn't even look like the website anymore. Maybe I'm on some other weird like software, right? And so in those moments, I think that's where we lean into frictionless. And then we recognize, like, when should there be good friction?
And Anne is sharing useful friction equal relationship building, which I think is a great way to
Yeah.
put it. Disagreements, and I've often found myself having to remind donors that we were aligned. Like sometimes it
Mm.
just takes some, reminding, but that's not like a bad thing, generally. Um,
Yeah.
we,
You
as a
know,
society, we have issues with that type of friction. I mean, I feel like maybe I'm generalizing.
It's interesting. I was on a call last week where somebody was asking about donor ego and how that plays into relationships. And other people were answering. And then I said, I think one of the things for us to consider is that ego is different than the perception of power. And I think sometimes there's a lot of research that suggests that when somebody is in a perceived position of power in a relationship, which I would say most fundraisers perceive their donors to have more power because they have the thing that the fundraiser wants, right? Which is
Hmm.
the money. And so when there is this perception, even subconsciously, of power, what happens is we often take casual comments to be requests. So
Mhm.
somebody can say something sort of offhandedly like, oh, well, maybe it would be nice if you guys had an additional truck for, that delivery. And we're like, okay, Adam wants the truck. Like we're going to buy a 12th truck, even though we don't really need it. And they were just kind of throwing it out there. And that would have been a great moment to say, Adam, tell me about why you feel like the truck is a worthy investment. Like, what about the truck does that accomplish in terms of our work that you feel really excited about? And then it's our job as the fundraiser to show them how that impact is possible through the thing that we actually need, right? And there's a 2-part series on what the fundraising as well with Vanessa Bonds, who wrote the book, You Have More Influence Than You Think. And we talk about exactly this. How do you push back in ways that are actually really in alignment with that mutual goal?
Mhm.
And how do we start to recognize there's another bulk of science that's super interesting about how people who have experienced a lot of power in their life overestimate the power of others. So that donor who
Mhm.
threw out that comment, because they have agency in saying that, they expect the fundraiser would tell them if it didn't work for the organization.
Exactly.
And so both sides want that dialogue.
Mm.
We're just kind of like
That's
missing each
beautiful.
other because of these perceptions.
And I love how you framed it as perceived power, right? It's
Mhm.
not, nobody's going to come and put you into prison for not buying that truck.
Yeah, but our brain plays lots of tricks on us.
I know, I know. I've fallen for those. August has a fantastic question. How do these philosophies pertain to when a gift officer is meant to qualify large groups of donors, i.e., mass blasting donors trying to get meetings? Ouch.
Mm. Well, one thing I would say is that segmenting groups based on interest areas and what you do know about them can be one way to sort of lean into alignment with something like this. So I don't believe that alignment is only possible in a one-to-one engagement. I absolutely believe that we can build automations and systems that are still really rooted in alignment. And I think one of the ways that we do that is through segmentation. And in the emails that we're sending out, even to get a meeting, we are identifying by maybe how they first came into your organization. Like, did they come to an event? And you're going to sort of root that in the email. Did they come in from a peer-to-peer campaign? And so that should look really different when you're reaching out to that person, right? The person who gave to their friend who's doing the thing, even if they gave $5,000, the email that you're sending that person should not sound like the person who gave $5,000 straight to your organization, because the reasons they gave were very different, at least in terms of what you know. And so I think when we reach out, particularly, I see this happen a lot with peer to peer, like we reach out to those donors, like, we know you care so much about mission of the organization. We do not know that. We know they care so much about their friend. That's what we know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we're curious if they also care about this work that we're doing, and they would care about investing in it beyond that. And so I think segmentation and customization based on how people learned about your organization, about what they've showed interest in before, those types of things can add to really rooting in alignment, and then talking about the things as well that you've noticed them participate in before. So if you've noticed every year they participate in this one particular campaign that's related to one area of your program, and then something happens in that program, I think those are the people you email and say, hey, I just wanted to know, you make sure you saw this update in our last email. And I'd be curious if you'd want to, grab 30 minutes on the calendar to talk a little bit about it. I know every single, for the past 3 years, you've particularly come to blank event. And so it might be a great time for me to just share more live about what's happening with blank.
My
I
goodness,
don't
Mallory.
know.
Fantastic advice. I love it.
I bet you have
Um,
some good advice here too. So tell me what I'm forgetting.
no, no, you're not forgetting anything. I was, yes, I mean, just start with engagement, which is what you said. Um, and thinking of smaller groups, so smaller segmentations. so valuable, and work it into the letter. I mean, just what Mallory said. So August, reach out to Mallory, listen to her podcast. I think there's a lot more there. But thanks everybody. Another thing you mentioned when you were talking about your course was you mentioned that that's a community too.
Mm.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Typically, lots of the courses is just a bunch of videos. And from what I've seen on your website, there seems to be a lot of interaction between the course participants. Have you found that to be effective, or do they find that to be effective?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think the reality is that, especially around the executive coaching and the habit and behavior design, those things need to happen in community. They need to happen with a certain level of human interaction. I mean, even fundraisers being able to say to each other, I felt really uncomfortable when, or this thing happened and I'm spiraling around it, or this donor ghosted me and I'm questioning everything about who I am. I mean, I just interviewed for the podcast this amazing psychologist, and she talks about how when we kind of gaslight our own emotions, when we don't give ourselves the space to express how we feel, and we don't validate that or have that validated, we actually get paralyzed. Our nervous system gets paralyzed and we can't take the next action. So if you've had this uncomfortable donor meeting, or you did get ghosted, you're not going to send that next outreach. You're not going to send it as either embodied in that same level of excitement, or you might not send it at all without being able to diffuse some of that energy that you feel from that negative experience. And so for me, the community is both a place to be giving advice and tips and trying things together, but it's also just a space for fundraisers and nonprofit leaders to feel seen and supported, and that knowing how they feel makes sense and is okay, and that they're surrounded by other people who are working on all those things too. I also think it's awesome to see a 2-week-old fundraiser and a 20-year-old fundraiser, in the same room, grappling with the same thing, because I think especially for new fundraisers, I thought, I must be bad at fundraising because I felt so uncomfortable, or I had this inner chatter, or I had some of these limiting beliefs. And I was like, there's no way that the pros feel this way, and I thought there was this secret to fundraising that I would one day arrive at. And I think, the fact is, every fundraiser is dealing with something. They're dealing with first of all, the things are changing so rapidly. They're dealing with changes to strategy based on different types of tools and different ways that people are engaging, and what's happening with, donors' time, all those things. But they're also always grappling with themselves and their own relationship to the work that they're doing. And I think if we could just normalize that a little bit more and help people recognize that, fundraising is a very vulnerable thing to do. Talking about money in general is a very vulnerable thing to do. For women in particular, there's a lot of science that talks about how we, for generations and generations and generations, have been biologically programmed not to rock the boat, to keep harmony at all costs, right? For women who identify maybe as people pleasers, or who are working on that, fundraising brings up all of our stuff. And so to grapple with those things and to really figure out what it looks like to feel good in your fundraising, to walk away from a donor, or to give up on a donor, that needs to happen in community, because it's not always going to happen. Your board's not always going to love it. Your boss might not always love it. It doesn't mean you don't need to do it.
You totally got what I mean. You totally kind of had a moment of ESP where I was going with this. Because, I feel deep in my heart that most people get it, have an intuitive sense of what makes sense. But there are all these pressures on fundraisers, that boards Maybe inside the organization, development is kind of its own thing that people don't want to touch because it might have the cooties. Um, you know, oh,
I know.
do you have advice, especially maybe let's start with talking to boards about
Yeah.
fundraising? Like, I imagine you try to empower your course participants to, manage up.
Yeah, I do. I have a training inside Power Partners that's for actually boards. They can take it out of Power Partners and use it with their boards, and then it gives them a
Mhm,
jumping off point for some different language to use with their boards. Look, the reality is the discomfort that we're talking about with fundraising, your board
mhm,
members feel it. Like they
mhm,
feel it. Your board doesn't actually need you to like create another 12-page impact report with slightly different formatting. Like the reason they're not reaching out to their network is because they feel uncomfortable with fundraising. And I think actually, if we can be more open about that and we can give them the space to say that, and we can start talking about alignment with them, that, I mean, when I do board trainings, that's the number one thing we do. And I think also for board members to not feel like you just want all of their friends with money. Like once board members
mhm,
start to recognize that you're leading with alignment, that you're not just interested in everyone they know, but you're interested in people who are trying to do the work that you all are trying to do, that really
mhm.
changes the way that they feel too. So there's a lot of, I think, like self-perpetuating
Yeah.
like elements here. And so I think like number one, being open about the fact that fundraising can be uncomfortable and giving, and this might need to happen in one-on-one conversations with board members, but just giving them space to say like, yeah, I really don't like doing that, or I really don't like doing that, or here's what makes me feel uncomfortable about that, right? And starting to recognize that it's a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our limiting beliefs about fundraising that makes us feel that way. And then I think giving them, opportunities to engage with the work in ways that feel digestible. So my main board training is around storytelling. And what I it's really just about how board members tell their story related to the work of the organization and how they do it in a way that feels really aligned and authentic. And then one time on a board training, I had this board member who was just a real naysayer. And he was like, okay, Mallory, but like, can't I just don't want to go around with our hand out all the time? Like, can't we just like tell our story the way that you are like having us do it here? Can't we just do that? And I was like, yes. And here's what I
Mhm,
want you to do. I want you to tell that story. And then if you notice that somebody's smiling, leaning in, asking a question, seeming curious, I want you to just add one sentence to the end of your story. Would you be interested in hearing more about what we do? Ask for permission and
mhm,
ask them. And then if they say no, and don't do it in a super guilt-ridden way, we really need more money. So like, would you like to hear more about what we're doing with our program over at like, no, just say like, hey, you seem super interested in what we're doing. Would you like to learn more? Like you can
mhm,
do, and that's it. That one question. And then if they say yes, and you're the one who ends up telling them more about this program and they still seem interested and they're still asking questions, then you just ask one more question. Hey, would you be interested in meeting with blank to learn more about what it looks like to get involved in our work? It seems like you're really excited about what I'm talking about. Again, with just genuine permission, two questions, and figuring out like how you can meet your board members where they're at, I think can be really helpful. And then also just helping reflect on some of the limiting beliefs we have about you know fundraising and money. Like I often at the beginning of board trainings, one thing we hear from boards a lot is, I don't want to ask the same people again this year, right?
mhm,
I emailed my network last year. I don't want to email the same people again this year. And I always say to them, okay, so in terms of like your birthday invitations, do you feel bad inviting the same people to your birthday party every year? Are you ever like, oh, they came last year, like they definitely don't want to be invited this year? If we feel
mhm,
bad sending out something every year, it might be because of what we're saying inside that email.
mhm. That
And
makes
we
so
can
much sense.
change that.
Oh my goodness. Well, Eileen has some encouraging comments here, purposeful engagement. So I'm kind of trying to deconstruct where all, the different breaking points for this. And, when you are in a situation where things are happening, board is working, the executive director or the chief fundraiser or whom, or the group of fundraisers is applying this body of knowledge. What about consistency? So, we have lots of turnover in nonprofits. Board members
Mm,
come and go. Like what I see that like the huge opportunity is when you can do all of this and then do it consistently over time, right? Because if not,
mm,
like, just doing it this month, well, maybe I should have gone back to sending those email blasts because, I actually got 5 more gifts. Um, I'm
mm,
being a little bit sarcastic, no? So
mm,
how do you help people kind of stay on the plan? I guess that peer
mm.
support is part of it. So that's why, you need a period of time.
Yeah.
Um,
Something I do inside Power Partners is like when there's so people join, one at a time, but whenever there's turnover, I add the new people to the license and I let the person who left take a license with them. So I normally
mhm.
don't talk about that too publicly, but I think because people would probably say it's not like smart as like from a business model for me, but for me it's like the little part I can play in just making sure that there is more consistency around the methodology that's being used and
Mhm.
things like that. I think there's two pieces to this. I think one is when people start to fundraise in alignment, it
Mhm.
starts to feel better and it's
Yeah,
a little bit addictive. Like it's like it
I'm with you.
and so in that way it sticks with us, right? Because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, like it can feel like this, like meetings can feel like this, emails can feel like this, like, and so in that way I think it helps reinforce the habit. The other thing is that because habit design is a big part of what we do, I'm teaching them how to design habits for their whole team from the very beginning. And so even if they were to leave, my hope would be that those habits would stick with the team. Things like celebrating fundraisers actions. So in habit and behavior change, one of the main ways that we cement a habit is through something called shine, right? Showing ourselves shine, showing each other shine. This is taken from Dr. BJ Fogg's work. And so what happens in fundraising is that we have tied our celebration and our KPIs to money, right? And sometimes how many meetings we have a month and things like that, but we don't tie it to all the little brave moments in between, like how many emails you sent out or how many nurture emails you sent out or how many thank you
Mhm.
calls that you made. I mean, some shops are doing that, but the vast majority of them are not, right? They're really looking
Mhm.
at KPIs related to results and outcomes. And Seth talks about this on the podcast as well, that when we are overly committed to outcomes, it leads
Mhm.
to a tremendous amount of burnout. And so we really need to be bringing habits in and showing shine for the actions that the fundraisers are taking. That's what's going to continue to support them taking that action over and over and over again. The other thing that I'll say from a consistency standpoint is that this might be a little heady for folks. I mean, the other thing is to just be prepared that
Mhm.
not using some of the same scattered systems and that hustle culture is to
Mhm.
recognize that all of those tendencies, that tendency of overdrive that we see inside our sector, staying busy, doing as many things as possible, that is actually a nervous system response. It's a form of procrastination. We're avoiding the scarier tasks in front of us. It makes perfect sense that we're doing it because fundraising is scary and we haven't been given a lot of tools to deal with that. But I think for
Mhm.
folks to start to build some awareness that yeah, you're gonna have that desire, that little critic in your head that says, hey, Mallory, you better send out those emails again this month, or you might not
Mhm.
raise that $200 and then you're gonna get fired and da 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 da. And that's our inner dialogue. That's a narrative. It's not true. But I think starting
Mhm.
to have some awareness that our body and our mind do those things, play those tricks on us, I think can be really helpful to stay the course. In the podcast, Seth talks about resistance. One of the things I love the way he talks about is that we don't need more strategies, we need less resistance. And he talks about the fact that, we can, he's like, I still feel resistance. I just know that when I hear that self-doubt or whatever it is, like it's there I learned to dance with it. I've learned to incorporate it into my life. And I would say the same thing is true for me. I feel plenty of self-doubt, just as much self-doubt as everyone else. I just don't spiral around my self-doubt. It comes in, even coming on today with you. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so smart. How am I going to keep up? Like that little voice in my head is like, I don't know, if you know enough. I don't know if you know enough about blank to do blank, right? Those inner narratives are totally normal. But when that voice comes into my head, instead of believing it or spiraling around, I'm like, oh yeah, there you are. I'm doing something new. Of course you're here. Welcome. Here we go. Signing on.
You're so funny. So, my goodness, you're like the best communicator and teacher I've come across, Mallory. And I think you posted about this a day or two ago. And I was about to answer, in my past life as a musician, I had to deal with that. And a trick, I came up with is you just, you tell that little voice, yes, you're right. And usually if you stop resisting, it goes away like that. So yeah, okay, yeah, I'm not good enough, sorry. But I'm still gonna do it, that's fine. And usually, at least for me, and everybody has their own techniques and strategies like that work for them.
I love that one. No, and that's a really scientifically proven one as well, to say like, you're a little bit right, and so to know that thing is the same thing as the voice that says, you better send out that email or else. That's the same nervous system habit. And so when you're thinking about staying the course with some of these strategies, it's just expecting that those voices are going to come, and then you can.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Jamie, wonderful consultant, musician, anything that Jamie isn't is, I don't know, she's amazing. I think the biggest mindset problem is when we forget that fundraising is a form of engagement and vice versa. That's just so true. A question from Anne. I heard an interesting question by a guest on a recent episode of Jason Lewis's podcast. Are we fundraisers or donor raisers? Which I guess goes to the relationship building piece, to the focus on outcomes that you were talking about versus actions. That's also kind of a big thing I read with Amazon, where they try to focus on what they can do rather than the results. That's kind of depends on lots of things that are out of their control. So, I think for people that have kind of an ear out there, you start hearing kind of the same pieces of good advice repeatedly, right?
Can I say one thing about that fundraiser versus donor raiser? I mean, I think we're both. And I think what we need is to feel less uncomfortable with the concept of fundraising. And we need to really think about what we want fundraising to truly be. For me, one of the things that's so frustrating is when I hear, people say, don't be transactional. And then I look, we don't want our fundraisers to be transactional, but then I look at their fundraising department and it's just the development director, and then marketing is siloed, and their community is siloed, and their volunteering is siloed. And I'm like, you've left the fundraiser with only the transaction. How are they not going to be transactional? You've taken everything else away. And so for me, we hear a lot about a culture of philanthropy, and I talk a lot about a culture of fundraising. Like, what does it look like for us to build a culture of fundraising in our organizations, right? So our marketing people stop being like, but I'm not a fundraiser, and we start to actually demystify like what good fundraising can look like and feel like. And again, this is where I go back to alignment, because if that's there, it can really fundamentally feel different, And so yes, in terms of thinking about donors from an engagement perspective, which is where I think that sort of question came from. I love that, but I don't want us to start to avoid the word fundraising because we think it's bad. It doesn't have to be bad. It is really about giving people an opportunity to participate in something that they believe deeply in. And I think we take for granted as fundraisers, as people inside these systems, that we get to live purpose-filled lives. We get to
Mm-hmm.
make impact every single day with what we do. That's an incredible privilege that I believe we have. And there's so many people that don't have that opportunity in their
Yeah.
jobs, and they do it through investing in work like yours. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think if we can change how we talk about fundraising, so it doesn't have to be this bad word, that's really where I'd love to see us go.
Yeah. I mean, I think also part of what fuels, at least my personal mission, is the added benefits of when fundraising is done right, what it does for
Mm.
society, what it does for connecting people, what it does for kind of, reducing harms and all types of bad stuff. It has lots of, benefits beyond the just give me your money.
This is another thing that came up on the Seth interview. So now you can see that I curated that interview to answer all the things I care the most about. But because I totally agree. And identity, like we build our identity based on how we give. And so, fundraisers are probably going to throw tomatoes at me for this one. But even if I had a money tree that could give you all the money that you need forever and ever, I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
do it, because I think that fundraising is not just a means to an end. It's not the dark side. It's not a necessary evil. Fundraising is the work. It's about engaging people in the work. And every time they give, their identity changes. They're more aligned with your mission. They're more aligned with your cause. They understand something about the problem better. That is a critical part of the work that we're doing. And so I'm so sorry, Anne, to hear about your experience. And I'm probably everyone on here has had things like that, or, those uncomfortable moments where,
Mm-hmm.
people have responded to what your job is or what you do inside your organization. And I just want you to know that like your work is so sacred and so important. And it is not just about powering the programs, that the act of fundraising is a critical need for humanity. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Oh my goodness, you can stay on it the whole day. You're preaching to the choir, or I'm not a good singer, so the whatever, recorder choir. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what you do. We talked a lot about your frameworks and the ways that you understand fundraising. Tell us about what's coming up next. What are you excited about? I believe you were at a conference that I hear is pretty cool. What's in the works? Just maybe for the profession itself and for you as well.
Yeah. So two things. So next week, well, a billion things, but I'll focus. So I am launching actually this week or next week, whenever all the URLs and links align. I'm going to launch a free community, what the fundraising, the community, which is going to be a little bit of a place for us to start to play and come together around the different science and methods and strategies that have been coming out on what the fundraising.
Awesome.
And there will be events, and there's going to be some really incredible stuff happening in there. And inside the community, I'm starting to share this framework that I've created called alignment fundraising, what the methodology is, what are sort of the governing beliefs and values, and what does it look like. And then we're going to start to practice alignment fundraising together inside that community, and just giving people more space for all the different layers of how they figure out their personal alignment, their habit and behavior alignment. It's totally free. I don't know if I said that. But really what I'm starting to look at on a deeper level. And so this provides for me an incredible amount of insight and ability to coach folks at all these different steps. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is that, we look at donor data all the time, right? Our donors do this, our donors, don't do this, our donors don't like blank. But every single donor behavior is connected to a fundraiser behavior. So whenever a donor does something, it's because a fundraiser did something first. And I don't think we've been looking at that enough. And when we do look at it, we really just talk about it from a skills perspective. So we say, okay, we want to get more people donating. And so we want to increase open rates, click rates, this and that. But we're not looking at the behavior that the fundraiser has to take and what gets in the way of that behavior, and wanting to connect fundraisers with more and more resources. So if you're struggling, if you haven't sent out personalization in your email, right? Like I see this all the time. An organization doesn't personalize their emails, and they keep going to trainings that say personalize your emails. And I think, and the tech companies are like, well, we make it super easy to personalize your emails, but the fundraisers are still not personalizing their emails. Why? There's a number of fears behind why they aren't personalizing their emails, because they're concerned about data hygiene. But even if they get data hygiene fixed, even if they get that fixed or good enough, which by the way, we really need to communicate about what that is more in this sector. But once they get their data hygiene good enough, they don't want to do it because they are afraid they're going to call someone Charles instead of Chuck, or they know that people fill out those forms wrong all the time and they're going to get it wrong, or they're going to miss something. And so but we know that when you personalize your emails, even when those mistakes exist, it's better for your organization, and that people overwhelmingly have compassion and grace for those little tech things. And so how do we help fundraisers in their nervous systems, in their habits, in their behaviors? How do we help them get over the action line and personalize those emails, right? Yeah, tech challenges, exactly, 100%, Jamie. And when we look at the behavior model, in order for any action to take place, it's the combination of motivation, ability, and a prompt. And motivation is the relationship between hope and fear. So fear drives motivation down, hope drives motivation up. And I think too often in this sector, we blame things on an ability issue. I don't have enough time. I don't have the tech. But actually the problem is a motivation issue related to fear and discomfort. And so my goal, probably my life goal, is going to be spent trying to help fundraisers overcome discomforts and fears related to every single action that's going to ultimately help them raise more and make the impact they're trying to make.
This is amazing, Mallory. Do you have a wait list? How do people get in there?
I should have thought about that ahead of time. But if you're on my email list, if you go to my website, MalloryErickson.com, and scroll to the bottom, sign up for my newsletter, that'll be the first place that I invite people into the community. And then follow me on LinkedIn or on Instagram as well, _Mallory Erickson. Those are the places I am sharing things. And so, yeah, if you want to get in there first, definitely join my newsletter, and then we'll be starting. We already have the Power Partners folks got to come in a little early. So we're already inside playing around and having fun, and then we'll be welcoming everybody else soon.
Well, this was a treat for everybody involved. Amazing. I want to say thanks to you. I want to say thanks to August, Jamie, and Kolakowski, who's going to present on planned giving with the Donor Participation Project later on. And I do hope that we have another chance, maybe even to meet in person sometime soon, because you deliver so much value in these things. Thanks a lot.
Likewise. Thank you so much.